Hey everyone, I'm Coach Chippys and I've been a professional top laner or head coach for the past 8 years. During this time I've reached Worlds and MSI multiple times. Now I'm a full-time coach with a ton of passion towards helping players unlock their potential and climb to their dream rank. How's it going everyone? Today I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about how to learn a Master Kennen. And I've been playing this champion ever since Smeb had that insane Kennen ulti back in the day at Worlds, and I've loved playing him ever since. And this champion right now especially has such a strong laning phase and team fight, there's not much more you can really ask for from a champion. So if you're to learn this champion, add him to your champion pool, and improve your mastery on him, you're going to win the majority of your games. So if that sounds good to you, let's get started. First up, we're going to be covering runes. Now Kennen, he doesn't just have 1 or 2 rune pages to choose from, that'd be too easy. Kennen actually has 6 unique rune pages and all of them are extremely strong in certain situations, so it's important to know when to take each one, because even though you could just run his default page every game, you could just run Summon Airy, and it would never not be good, this page is pretty consistent on Kennen, you're not truly getting the most out of your champion by maximizing the amount of rune pages he has available to him, so you're not truly going to become a master of this champion if you just stick to the one page. So I'm going to go through all 6 pages and when to take each one, and hopefully that'll help you have a better understanding by the end of it. To start us off, we're going to be going through Kennen's most standard page, the Summon Airy page, and this is the one you're going to be taking in the majority of your games because it really helps Kennen play out his lane the way he likes to play it. Kennen really likes to take small trades and likes to poke under tower, and he doesn't really like all-ins until he's already done the groundwork, until he's already got your lane opponent low enough that an all-in is feasible. If you just try to all-in him from full HP, most of the time that's not going to work, so you want to be taking Airy to really help you chip away at them. Taking Airy and Scorch in tandem can really help get your lane opponent lower and lower, and eventually you'll be looking for all-in threats later on when they're already half or lower HP. Now to go through all the runes in the tree, you're going to be taking Nimbus Click every game, as the extra movement speed on your flash engages is really going to help you out a lot in later points of the game. And you're going to be taking Absolute Focus every game, because it really helps the way Kennen likes to lane. He likes to stay high HP, while chipping his lane opponent lower and lower before he all-ins, and Absolute Focus is going to help with that point. Because if you're playing Kennen, and you're beginning low HP yourself, if you're trading HP you're both half, that is not the way you want to be playing this champion, because he's very, very vulnerable to being all-in by the majority of top laners. Even by Riven, Fiora, Jax, even a champ like Malphite, you don't want to be low versus champs, or you're going to really struggle. You want to be chipping their HP lower and lower, while staying high HP yourself, and Absolute Focus helps with that playstyle. And then for the final rune in the blue tree, it'll either be Scorch or Gathering Storm. However, you will be taking Scorch upwards of 90% of the games, as that's the way Kennen wants to be laning, right? Chipping your lane opponent lower and lower, and Scorch and Airy in tandem will help with that. But Gathering Storm, you'll take it in very, very free matchups where they're not really going to be punished that hard. Champs like Dr. Mundo or Sion, for example, if you were to take Airy, even though I recommend different pages, if you were to take Airy against them, you would want Gathering Storm for sure. And as for the secondary tree, you'll be running Domination almost every single time. And in that tree, you'll be running Taste of Blood for, of course, the small trading, and either Ultimate Hunter or Ingenious Hunter. Now, Ultimate Hunter you should be taking a lot of the time, especially in lower elo brackets where there's constant fighting. But as you start getting to Diamond and higher, there are actually times when Ingenious Hunter is better, because the lowered cooldown on your Proto Bout, on the Rocket Bout, can help a lot with wave clear when you're versing strong side laning champions, and you don't want to be stuck in lane too long. If you have the lower cooldown from Ingenious Hunter, you can just look to clear the wave with the Rocket Bout, your EW, and then head straight to a team fight where if you had the full 45-second cooldown, then there'll be situations where you can't be using it every single wave. Now, as for the situations where you don't run Domination, these are in matchups where you very much need Bone Plating. And in those matchups, you of course take Resolve and run Bone Plating unflinching. And this is pretty rare, even in some matchups such as Jax, where Bone Plating is very good. I still prefer Domination, but if you're just learning the champion, you're not that comfortable in your spacing and taking small trades, if you feel like you're getting low a lot in these lanes versus all-in champions, then I recommend Resolve for you and add Bone Plating unflinching until you gain more confidence, because this page is easier to play versus Riven, play versus Jax, than it is to take Domination. However, it's not as strong overall, especially later on in the game. But if you need the page, if you're struggling early on in your Kennen journey, then definitely run Resolve, and Bone Plating is going to help you out a lot. So to summarize this page, the times you're going to be wanting to take Summon Airy are in matchups where you're going to be short trading. So matchups such as Alawi, such as Urgot, such as Gwen, you're going to get destroyed if you all in these champions unless you've already set the groundwork, unless you've already got them low enough, then all in is feasible. So Airy will help you a lot in these matchups, but it won't really help in matchups such as Dr. Mundo or Cho'Gath, where even though you're melee versus range and you can poke them down, they have a ton of sustain, and also they have skill shots that they'll hit you back with, and the trade is not really that good, where if you're to take another page that we'll cover later on, it's going to have a lot more impact in these sorts of lanes. Moving on to the second rune page Kennen has at his disposal, and that is the Fleet for Work page. Now this rune page is extremely powerful when you're going to be building Static Shiv, because the extra movement speed, sustain, the attack speed from Alacrity will help get the most out of this item, and you of course don't need the extra damage from summon Airy, because building Static Shiv you're going to be getting early longswords, Noon Quiver, the Carrot, whatever it's called, and you're going to be doing a lot of extra damage from auto attacking anyway. That Airy is unnecessary. It's actually better to use the movement speed and sustain of Fleet Footwork to gain lane advantage, especially the movement speed and the matchups where this rune and this item is good is going to be very helpful. And my best example is I'd always run this page versus Fiora. Because versus Fiora, you of course want to be stronger than her. You want to win the lane, because she's one of the best scaling champs in the game, and of course your range versus melee, you should be gaining a lane advantage against her, because if you don't, she's going to get Hullbreaker, she's going to destroy you in the side lane, and if you haven't made a huge impact in the game before that point, you're going to really struggle. So in versus a champion like that, I'd run Fleet and Footwork, and I'd build Static Shiv, and I'd look to really maximize the advantage I can get out of my laning phase. As for the runes you'll be taking in this tree, you'll be running Presence of Mind every game, as the extra energy regeneration is very useful, and then you'll be running Alacrity every game, as the extra attack speed is quite helpful with the amount of AD you're building towards your Static Shiv build path. And then the final rune will either be Coup de Grace or Cut Down, but I recommend Cut Down most of the time, as most of the champs you're going to be versing as Kennen will build HP and you won't, so it's going to be quite useful, especially early lane if they start stacking HP to mitigate some of the damage you're doing. And then for the secondary rune tree, you'll be running Resolve most of the time, so you can have access to Bone Plating versus all-in champions and Unflinching. And then if you don't need the Bone Plating, if it doesn't feel that useful, you'll of course be taking Domination and Taste of Blood Ultimate Hunter. And to summarize, the times I'd be wanting you to take this rune page are in matchups where you're versus a side laning champion that can't really trade back onto you, and you can gain a big lane advantage by having the extra AD build path. So for example, we touch on Fiora, but also champs such as Darius, such as Set, they can't really get onto if you're spacing correctly, and with the extra AD and attack speed and wave clear of Static Shiv, you're going to be doing a lot of extra damage to them, which can lead to tower plates, lead to a lane advantage. Especially versus champs like Fiora and Darius, you really want to be winning lane against them, because the difference in laning strength between you and them in this matchup is so high, and also they're so powerful in the side lane later on that you won't be able to compete with them unless you have gained a lead, so Static Shiv feels real good in those situations. And another time I'd recommend building this are in games where you have a ton of AP. Let's say you pick Kennen early on, trying to do your team a solid, and they betrayed you by picking AP mid, AP jungle, then I'd definitely just build Static Shiv, because everyone you verse is going to be building Magic Resist, Merc Treads, so having a bit of AD in your build can really help you still be able to pump out damage. Up next we have the Conqueror page, and I recommend taking this one in matchups where you verse either a tank or an extremely tanky champion, and they're going to be looking to fight you. So the best example is versus Cassante, where even though he's one of the tankiest champs in the game, he also has an insane all-in. Of course he does it all, thanks for that, Riot. But if you're to take Conqueror, there's actually a good chance you can win that all-in, because as he's walking towards you, trying to, get in range of popping his ulti, you can be kiting him back, stacking your Conqueror, and even if he dash ult you, now that you've got enough stacks in that you can pop ulti, and you're actually going to look to win that all-in, where even if you're to take Airy, he's going to have Dawn Shield second win, he's going to build Magic Resist early, you're not really going to be able to do much meaningful poke to him, and you're also going to have a much weaker all-in. As for the runes in this tree, you'll be taking the same as the Fleet page, Presence for energy, Alacrity for A speed, and of course you'll be taking Cut Down because you're only taking this page versus a tank. And then for the secondary runes, you'll always want to be running Domination, Taste of Blood, very useful in tank matchups, and then Ultimate Hunter. Now to summarize and also go into a bit more detail about when to take this page, because Cassante was just too perfect of an example, it's versus tanks or tanky champions, where the poke damage is not going to be meaningful, but also they're going to be fighting you back. So champions such as Volibear, such as Udyr, such as Sion, they are very tanky, especially once they start basing and getting Merc Treads and MR, they've got a lot of shielding and sustain, that the poke damage is not meaningful. So it's very hard to poke them to the point where they're low enough that you can all in them, where they're low enough that you can dive them or chip tower place in front of them. So Airy is not going to have much use in those matchups. But also if you're to run a greedier rune that we'll cover later on, you're probably going to get punished because they actually have fighting tools. They have abilities to trade onto you, where if they try to do that and you've got Conqueror, they're going to take a lot more damage than if you're to take either First Strike or Airy or another rune like that, or even Fleet. Fleet can be okay, but I don't like taking it versus tanks because, of course, you're giving up a lot of teamfight power from building Fleet and Static Shiv, where if you're versus a tank, they're already strong at teamfighting to begin with, and also the advantage you gain over them is not as useful. If you gain a big advantage over a champ like Fiora by building a greedy item like Static Shiv, then it is okay. But if you're to gain an advantage over a Sion, it doesn't really matter, you should be winning your lane anyway, and taking Conqueror will be able to be a good middle ground, where you can do meaningful damage to him, that you can take stronger trades, stronger all-ins, and make him more scared to fight back to you. But also, you're still going to be strong in team fights. Conqueror is not bad in team fights, I'd say. It's probably similar strength to Area. It's very rare you're going to get a full stack Conqueror in a team fight as Kennen, right? You normally just do a one and done ulti. But for the most part, Conqueror is a good middle ground between being greedy with the fleet build and being standard Kennen with the Area build, where the poke doesn't really do much damage to these very, very tanky champs. For page number 4, we have the First Strike page, and even though this rune page can feel quite good and it's quite fun, I'd only recommend taking it in free matchups, and you'll know exactly which matchups they are when we cover the matchup section of the guide, but for now just keep in mind you'll only be taking it in lanes where they can't really trade you back. And the runes you're going to be taking in this page is either going to be free boots or stopwatch. Of course, free boots is better a lot of the time because it's an extra of 300 gold you don't have to spend, but stopwatch can be good when you need it if you're versus a champion such as Kha'Zix jungle, Zed mid champs like that, and early stopwatch can be quite useful. And then for the second rune, I'd be taking Minion Dematerializer because it really helps you getting a nice base off on a cannon wave. You can just demat the cannon, one-shot the wave, and then get a good base off. And then for the final rune, of course, Cosmic Insight. Now, the reason I like this page a lot is, of course, free money. Everyone likes a bit of money in their bank. But Cosmic Insight feels so good on Kennen because he's such a flash-reliant champion. He can't really engage without flash unless you're versus bots or they just can't see you. So having Cosmic Insight, having the extra flash every 4 minutes instead of every 5, it's just so overpowered on this champion. But of course, it's pretty hard to be able to take it on Kennen because he's such a strong laner, but you really want to be taking runes that maximize your laning strength. But if you can get away with taking the First Strike rune page and taking Cosmic, then it's just so good on this champ. And the second page you'll be taking, the second rune, will be Sorcery, and you'll be taking Gathering Storm Absolute Focus. Because of course, if you're taking it in a free matchup where they're not even going to be hitting you, Scorch is not that useful. You want to be getting extra scaling from the G-Storm. So to summarize yet again, the times you'll be taking First Strike are in matchups where they cannot trade you back. Because let's say, for example, in a normal matchup where you're versus Gnar, and you both chuck a Q at each other or a trade in auto, having Airy and Scorch can be very useful in that situation. But if you versus a champ like Garen or Singe, which I would count as a free matchup, there's no way they can hit you. Even if you do the same amount of damage in 10 autos as you would with 7 or 8 with Airy, it doesn't matter, because they're not going to hit you back anyway. You're still full HP chipping away the HP bar, but you're also gaining money and scaling from Cosmic at the same time, that it doesn't really matter that you're doing less damage to them, and you might not even have a chance to kill them if they play better. Because you're doing less damage overall, you're going to be gaining a lot of free money from them, and these champions shouldn't die to you anyway. Champs like Singe and Phase Rush Garen, essentially they should not be dying to you. Even if you take Airy, it doesn't really matter, but the way you gain a big advantage of them is of course taking First Strike and just hitting them when they can't hit you back, trying to get tower plates, trying to get as much money as possible, and then getting your items a lot earlier than you normally would. Up next we have the Electrocute page, and the times I recommend you to take this one are in matchups where you are outranged. So an example is versus Jace, where his Q range of course is a lot longer than yours, and if you try to trade auto attacks with him, even if you have Airy, you're going to lose because he's an AD champion. So in that situation, I'll take Electrocute and have stronger all-in if you get a gank, and have a lot better scaling in teamfights, as this page is a lot better at teamfighting than Airy. Of course it does a lot more damage, especially later on, and the runes you're going to be taking an Electrocute will be Taste of Blood, Zombie Ward, and Ultimate Hunter. Now Zombie Ward is very good on Kennen because he's quite vulnerable to ganks, so having that extra vision game is quite useful, and then for the secondary range you'll be taking Scorch and Absolute Focus. So to summarize again, the times I want you to take this rune are in matchups where they outrange you, so it just means all the other runes are quite useless if you think about it. If you verse champs such as Jace, we touched on, Cassiopeia, maybe even Heimerdinger, you're not going to be proccing Airy on them without getting destroyed. First Strike, they're just going to cancel it before you get the chance to get the extra money. Fleet, you can't even auto-attack them, so on and so forth. All the other rune pages are just useless, so you might as well have the extra all-in damage in teamfights, which feels quite good, and also if you receive a gank, flash onto them, the extra damage can be quite useful in that situation too. And for the final page, we have Phase Rush, and this one is more niche than all the other 5, but there are still some situations where you really need it for your lane. And there are matchups such as Olaf, where if you don't take Phase Rush, you can't get the slow resist by proccing it when he runs at you. He's just going to hit 1x on you, pop Ghost, and chase you down. You're not really going to be able to live, because the way you self-peel on Kennen is generally by CCing them, but of course with Olaf you can't do that, so you really need Phase Rush to mitigate the slows he's going to be dishing out to you. And for the runes we'll be taking on this page, of course you'll know by now, it will be Nimbus Cloak, Absolute, and Scorch. These are the runes that you'll be taking every time in the matchups where you need Phase Rush. And for the secondary page, of course, Taste of Blood, Ultimate Hunter, always good. And to summarize and go into a bit more detail, the times I'd want you to take Phase Rush are in matchups where the slow resist effect is quite useful and you need the move speed to kite them out. So Olaf is the best example where you can't play this matchup without Phase Rush or you're just going to get farmed. And then another example is versus Tryndamere, where he's going to slow you with his W, chase you down, get a lot of autos onto you. But if you take Phase Rush, you can really look to mitigate his ability to do so. And also a champ like Nasus, where a lot of his kit is built around his Wither, and you can look to cleanse that out early game and get more poke down onto him. And to be honest, in that matchup, you could just build Swifty Boost instead. But then early game, you're still going to get withered, you might die to a gank, so having Phase Rush is very useful in that matchup regardless. Up next, we're going to be covering Summoner Spells, and this one won't take too long as it's pretty straightforward. You're going to be running Flash every single game, because without it, your team fighting is going to be so much weaker, and also you're just going to get farmed by the jungler, which is not too fun. And for your second spell, you're going to be running Teleport almost every game, because this is the spell you're going to be using to get TP flanks. And also it's strong for laning, it's good for when you verse side laning champions that are trying to keep you stuck on the side, you can use it to be a part of fights, but in general Ignite is not that useful. However, there are some situations where I'd take it. Even in high elo, the matchup I'd like to take Ignite is versus Silas, where it's a pretty common counterpick to Kennen, because he's got very, very strong all-in when he steals your ulti and he has a lot of healing from W, but if you take Ignite, you can actually look to win that matchup, especially because you win early game. Now, as for other elo brackets around Platinum and lower, the times I would take Ignite are in matchups where you're guaranteed to get Prior, and also the all-in threat is very useful. So matchups such as, Renekton, champions such as Fiora, they have quite a lot of healing, they're quite strong. If you get ahead of them, it's very, very good for the game. They're not some brain-dead tank like Ornn or Malphite, where if you get ahead of them, it's not that useful, but the extra healing cut of Ignite is very, very useful in all-ins. But I wouldn't take it in higher elo because those players know what they're doing, and the junglers know what they're doing, so they're just going to stay high HP and look to camp you, and then if you don't have TP to come back to lane, you're going to lose quite a lot. However, you can look to be greedy with Ignite in those matchups such as that. It's just I recommend TP because if you're playing Kennen, you want to be playing for team fights primarily, and TP flanking is such a powerful tool, you don't really want to be giving it up. Up next, we're going to be covering item builds. Now, even though Kennen's rune pages had so many to choose from, and it may have been a little bit overwhelming, his builds are actually quite simple. There's not a ton of variety, and it's quite easy to really know which item to buy on this champion, and we'll go through that now. Now, as for your starting item, even though Kennen is an AP champion, you're going to be building an AD starting item every single game. And that's just because Kennen's primary trading tool is his auto attacks, and also you're really going to struggle to last it without it. Because Kennen actually has 48 base AD, which is extremely low. So if you don't build one of these items, you're not going to do much damage from your autos, and you're going to really struggle to get farm. So for the item specifically, you're going to be building Dome's Blade almost every single time, as even though the AD is similar, the extra HP you gain from this item can help a lot versus all-in champions. Which in solo queue you're probably going to be building versing them more often than not. Champs like Riven, Irelia, Camille, Jax, very popular in solo queue, so the extra AD and HP can help you a lot in those matchups. And then as for Cole, I'll take this in free matchups, especially if you have First Strike. Having First Strike and Cole together, it's just so much extra money, you'll be getting your items a lot faster. And then Longsword, I'd build this every single game that you're going to be building Static Shiv, because it's basically just going to get you your item 450 gold quicker, because you're not building Doran's Blade, you're just going straight to sword, and you'll have a couple extra pots in the early lane, which can be quite useful. Moving on to your first item, you're going to be building Rockabout every single game. The only difference is in some games you'll be building Static Shiv first. And the only difference is if you're taking Fleet and you're playing in matchups where you have a strong side lane champion, so you want to be dominating in lane, champs like Fiora, we talked about it a bit in the rune section, then Static Shiv first into Rockabout is the build, but most of the time you will just be building Rockabout first. And I have seen some people build Night Harvester, but I don't like this item on Kennen. It doesn't really help him do what he wants to be doing in teamfights, where the extra movement speed and extra gap closer from Rockabout is very, very useful for repositioning your ulti, where Night Harvester is more of a greedy item for greedy 1v1s. That's not really Kennen's identity, so I prefer Rockabout almost every single time. Actually, every single time. Moving on to boots, ideally on Kennen, you're going to be buying your tier 2 boots on your first base. You want to be trying to stay in lane long enough, poking your lane opponent down, making him base before you, where you can get your tier 2 boots and he cannot. Because if he buys Merc Treads on his first base, he's going to be doing a lot better into you than in a scenario where you made him base beforehand, and buy him maybe a Null Magic Mantle or a Ruby Crystal or a Sheen, something like that. If you can make him base before he gets 1100 gold, and then you can stay until you get 1100. Now that is just a perfect way to play lane on Kennen. However, that is ideal, you can't always be doing that, but for the most part you'll be buying Sork boots if you're able to pull that off, and I'd very rarely go Ninja Tabbies or Merc Treads. I'd only build them in games where they have triple AP topside, triple AD topside, something like that where you just need them. Moving down to your second item. Now this is when you really need to start thinking about it, because Shadow Flame is the best most of the time. However, you do need to be ahead to build this in a lot of games, because there are so many scenarios I see Kennen players, they build their Shadow Flame, and then the opponent has MR before they can even finish their Blighted Jewel, let alone their whole Void stuff, and their damage is just so low. So you need to be aware of the champs on the enemy team, if they're going to be building MR or not, and then decide, do I need Void Staff now to predict their MR that's coming, or can I go Shadow Flame and then by the time they've got MR, I've got my Void Staff anyway as a third item, and I'm fine. However, if you're ahead of the game, if you're 3-0 finish your lane, you're very powerful, you can just go Shadow Flame and then look to carry as hard as possible in the early game, in the mid game, sorry, and then you'll be gaining more gold to buy your Void stuff by the time they get MR. But if you're even, or if you're behind in lane, and they have tanks on their team, or champs that are going to stack MR, then definitely you need to be looking at Void Staff second and skipping Shadow Flame entirely. And as for the other items, I know a lot of people love tunneling on Zhonya's on Kennen because you can do their ulti Zhonya's combo, and of course that is very strong. However, I do not like it as a second item most of the time, because your damage is not going to be that high, so that even if you get an ulti Zhonya's off, it's not going to be that threatening. The times I like Zhonya's is when you actually need it. In games where they have a Talon, they have a Zed, they have a Kha'Zix that are very strong, and you're just going to get one shot without it. So if you have Zhonya's, of course you can ulti Zhonya's when they go onto you, you're going to stun their Fed Assassin, and then your team's going to be able to finish them off. It's going to be a lot better than just tunneling on building Zhonya's to get a teamfight ulti off, where your damage will be too low at that point in the game. And as for the other two items, I very rarely build them as a second item, but I will go Banshees in games where they have a lot of magic damage threats, primarily triple AP topside, and Banshees can be quite good. And as for Morello's, just games where you need that healing cut, where they have champs like Soraka, Aatrox, and a healing cut is just going to be very, very useful, and no one on your team is building it. Moving on to your third item, most games you will need Void Stuff by now, as they're going to start building MR, but if for some reason they're not building any, or you already have it by now, you can look to go Death Cap to maximize your damage, or Zhonya's if you need it, because from now you got 3 items, one of them being Shadow Flame or Void Stuff. Your damage is going to be significant, so the ulti Zhonya's combo is quite good. And then Banshee, same as before if you need MR, Morello's if you need healing cut, and Shadow Flame third, I'll very rarely build it. The only reason I put it here is because in some games you'll be building Shiv and then, of course, Proto Belt, where if you don't need voice stuff from this point, then you'll be going Shadow Flame, because Death Cap won't be giving you enough effective AP from just one AP item that it's useful as a third item, so don't build Shadow Flame third if you're building AP Kennen, only build it on Shiv Kennen. Moving on to your fourth and fifth items, it's the same reasoning for these as before, but you really want to start looking at getting your Death Cap at this point in the game. And as you notice in the full build examples I've got here, every single full build example has Void Stuff and Death Cap. And that's just because you don't want to be hitting 6 items on Kennen without these 2 items, as they give the most damage later on in the game, and most of the time you will be wanting a Zhonya's as well, because once you have Death Cap Void Stuff especially, your ulti Zhonya's combo is going to be so powerful in teamfights that you want to be getting Zhonya's almost every single game as well. Up next we're going to be covering the laning phase, and I have a few examples here from recent solo queue games of mine that I've played this week, and I'm going to be talking you through my thought process throughout them, and hopefully that'll help you gain a better understanding of how to lane on Kennen, because for the most part, you'll be playing a range versus melee matchup, as there's not that many range tops in the game, and most of the time you'll be playing Kennen, you'll be versing one of these melees, so you want to be abusing the fact that you're range versus melee, and looking to poke him down as much as possible. Because even though Kennen has a strong laning phase, his all-in is quite weak, especially if you're both full HP. So if you're able to get them low enough before they can get to the point to trade onto you, then you're able to gain an advantage in some way. So for example here with Yone, if I were to have let him stack his Q 3 times and Q onto me full HP versus full HP, lethal tempo, he of course would have destroyed me. But I've been auto-attacking him as hard as possible before he even gets to the wave, and even now I'm just trying to poke him down as much as I can, so that he can't really all-in me, he can't look for these big trade opportunities because he's going to get low enough that he'll be diveable. And now, another thing you need to keep in mind is even though you want to be permanently auto-attacking him, you don't want to ruin the integrity of your wave. You don't want to crash wave 2 too early. You want to crash a bigger wave as possible so that while he's focused on getting all those last hits, you're able to poke him down as much as possible. Because if you just crash the second wave, not only does he have a chance to freeze it outside his tower and then collect wave 3 for free without you being able to poke him under tower, he can also, it's also that not big of a wave, so if it crashes under his tower, he can just clear it pretty quickly, and then there's less time that he's exposed to your auto attacks. So I've cleared it now, and another thing you might notice is I used a ward in lane, and I used that to gain an advantage, but that means I'm now vulnerable to being ganked, which means I need to play accordingly, and in this case, I'm full HP. So even though my lane is pushed up and I'm poking him under tower, I'm full HP, I've got flash, I'm holding on to my E, the chance I die is quite low, and also I'm not playing that disrespectfully. There I wanted to play aggressively, but I didn't want to get ganked, so I didn't poke him too hard under tower on that moment, because this is around the time where a jungler is going to be ganking me, around this certain time period, where if he's cleared up, he's going to be looking to punish me now, and then for the most part, as long as I'm not disrespecting wasting my E, I'm not getting low HP, I'm not going to be killable, and I actually let my jungler finish his full clear. So now my Briar, he's done his clear and he's taking top grab, so now I cannot get ganked. If I get ganked, I'm just going to kite to the Briar, he's going to counter gank and we're going to win, and it's okay. But you notice during that time period when I was vulnerable, when I could have been ganked, that is when I respected, and that's something you need to know on Kennen. Of course, if you watch the guide I made about tracking jungle, It's going to help you a lot for Kennen, where when you verse full clear junglers, it's quite predictable what they want to do, and then verse 3 clear early pressure junglers, they're going to be looking to pressure you before you get that wave in. But in this scenario, I was respecting on that timer, and now my Briar, who decided to full clear, he was able to protect me on the next timer. And now if his jungler were to have stayed topside for this long in the game not farming, it's not going to be worth it for him, and he's probably still not going to kill me. I've still got flash, I'm still full, so now I'm feeling confident to play aggressively. And now, from this point in the lane, I've gotten him low enough that I can look to be playing more aggressively, but I don't want to keep him stuck under his tower, because I'm not going to be able to dive him, he still has TP, and it's not really the highest probability play of me getting an advantage. So now, I let the wave come back to me. And it's important that when the wave is coming back to you, your lane opponent is not full HP. Because, as you see here, he's Darren Shield Yone, but he's used his potion, so now that he has no extra regen, and he's going to be around that HP by the time the wave is in a good spot for me to punish him. But that's not good enough. I need to be poking him more and more, as you see here, and now he is in kill range because I've gotten him lower and lower. Where if I were to have just let the wave come in without doing anything, then and he was still 3/4, then I definitely won't be able to kill him. Kennen's all-in is so weak, especially pre-6, that you really need to be chipping away at their HP bar, using your Aries, Scorch, your auto attacks, every tool you have in your kit, to just poke him lower and lower. And now I'm trying to zone him from XP, and he's going to, of course, he's a solo queue player, he doesn't want to give all his XP and minion, he's going to play aggressively, and I was able to burn his flash here. It's important to note, I did not flash after him there. There was a chance I'd kill him by flash following and doing 2 auto attacks, but it wouldn't have even been worth it, because my wave is still in a good spot where I've got flash advantage, that he is going to die anyway. In the future, he's going to die. He's already signed the death warrant, right? His funeral's already planned out. I don't need to kill him in that moment. I don't need to rush it. I can base, buy my items, TP back to lane while my wave is still in a good spot, and look to hold this freeze while punishing him further, because he's got no flash, he doesn't know where my jungler is, and of course my jungler's topside now, due to the way she's clearing up, and it's very, very hard for him to play the game. So I'm just going to look to be doing the same thing, trying to hold my wave here and poke him down as much as I can if he tries to get the wave in. And here he tries to push the wave in because he doesn't want to respect Bria the whole time and give XP and CS, and I'm able to get a good trade down. And that's another point to note, you can use your ulti for a good trade. You don't only need to use your ulti for a kill or for a huge team fight, you can use it for a very good trade. Because now look, he's so low I'm able to kill him with my basic abilities, where even if I had ulti here, I wouldn't really be able to stick onto him with it, the ulti would not be that useful, but using it to block the fact that he tried to crash that wave led to him being chunked enough that I could kill him with my basic abilities. Up next I wanted to show something a little different, where if you play Kennen, you are most likely going to get ganked. That is reality, because you're a ranged champ, poking your lane opponent down the whole game, and he's going to be pinging, he's going to be crying, he's going to be asking for help, and you're probably going to get ganked. And even though in the last game I respected every jungle timer he could have done to me early game, we still didn't see him. He didn't show into my lane, so it's harder to visualize what that looks like. So in this game, I'm versus Lee Sin jungle, and I have a Tilia. And this game my Tilia is clearing down, and the Lee Sin's clearing up, because he's going to start red on Lee Sin, most likely, and he's not going to full clear. He's going to look to kill 3 camps and gank somewhere, which is most likely going to be top or mid. And since mid is Tristana, it's probably not going to be mid, because he's very safe. So I choose to ward level 1, so I can see if Lee Sin's coming, and now I'm playing to stay high HP, unlucky on that trade there, but I'm just looking to get as much CS as possible, look to 3-wave crash, and maybe base, maybe stay around, but ideally I just want to be playing around Lee Sin's timers. And here he can't be top this early, and I have a ward, so I can look for a bit more of an aggressive trade, and eventually I'm probably going to see him coming. If he doesn't come, I'm just going to crash my wave as normal, look to poke him, but here he is, right on schedule, he's killed his 3 camps, and he wants to pressure me. Gangplank's asking for help, and most likely, and Lee Sin's coming to do so. But here, I'm just looking to soak XP, but Lee Sin actually commits all the way, which is a mistake by him, but it's something a lot of junglers will do. And now, even though this sucks, right, I'm losing XP, I'm losing gold, I'm still helping my team in some way. And this is something you need to be okay with on Kennen, is even though it's more fun and more flashy to carry the game by destroying your lane, getting a big advantage, there are going to be a lot of games where you actually not carry, but impact the game in a high way by drawing the jungler to you. Because top lane, you can't really help mid, you can't really help bot. You're so isolated from the map, a big way you help the rest of your team is by drawing the jungler to you. And especially if you're playing range vs melee, they're going to be asking for a lot of ganks. If you're just this ungankable titan, surviving all that pressure, wasting the jungler's time. Now this game, my Tilly has so much time. He can full clear, he can gank bot, gank mid, do whatever he wants, might maybe even play for enemy bot camps. He can just do whatever he wants because I'm drawing this Lee Sin's pressure, and then as you'll see later on, I'm still able to get a lead in my lane anyway, because the Lee Sin, even if he's camping top, he cannot be there literally every single second of the game. So there'll be windows for you to gain an advantage and draw pressure at the same time. Now, from this point in the lane, I base and TP back to get full HP and replace my ward straight away. Because of course Lee Sin is going to look to clear top crab. That spawns at 330, he pathed up, there's a high chance he wants to eat crab, and then he's going to look to gank after. Where if I stayed in my lane after crashing the wave low HP, he will of course come. But now he sees me on full HP, I respected his earlier gank, so I keep my flash. He doesn't want to gank for this guy, even if GP's asking him for it, he's probably not going to want to come, and if he does, I'm going to survive it. I'm going to stun him and E away, and I might have to flash worst case, but now Gangplank felt comfortable because Lee Sin was on the top side of the map, he felt like he could farm. But I was making the wave come back towards me, and I punished him as he went to get CS. I was still playing my lane aggressive, just in a different way. I wasn't looking to poke him under tower, I wasn't looking to dive him. Lee Sin's topside, that's not reality. And even though GP didn't have to die there, he could have based, got full HP, TP'd back, and using the threat of Lee Sin, he could have crashed a wave, right? If he played perfectly, he wouldn't have died. Every player you verse is not going to play perfectly. There's going to be times when you can punish them, and even though in this game, where my objectives changes from hard punishing this GP to drawing pressure from Lee Sin because of the way both junglers were playing, there'll still be times where I can do both. Lee Sin, even if he's playing topside, he's not going to be there the entire game. There are going to be times when he leaves. He's going to look to do crab, look to do his camps, he might even look to gank other lanes, and that's the time you can punish your lane, where even though in an ideal world you could punish him the whole time, especially in this matchup, as long as you're playing around both junglers and drawing pressure, you're still impacting the game in some way. To finish off, I want to show an example of a game where I made quite a big mistake in lane. However, my lane state is still okay. And I just want to showcase the fact that even if you make a big mistake in your lane as Kennen, as long as you do the rest of the things correctly, or if you have done everything else before that point correctly, you're going to be fine. So to show an example here, I'm versus Shen and Elise. Now, of course they have very, very strong ganks, where Shen can taunt me, Elise can cocoon me, and I'm just going to die. So I ward very deep level 1 to spot her level 3 gank, and the reason I ward deep instead of shallow is because a lot of Elises will take water walking, and if she boosts into my lane with her spider form and water walking, then even if I see her coming, I'm probably still going to die. So if I get a very deep ward, I have so much time to respond to her coming that I'm going to be fine. And now I'm just looking to get as much last hits as I can, and punish Shen every time he goes for CS. Now, as wave 3 arrives, I look to push it more quickly than the others, because I don't want to be stuck in lane crashing wave 4. Even though in a lot of games you want to be crashing wave 4, it's fine. Versus Elise Shen, it's very, very risky. I don't want her to come into lane, chase me away from CS and XP, like we saw versus Lee Sin. So I just want my wave crash as fast as possible, so if she pressures me, I'm not losing XP. And here's where my mistake lies. I get taunted under tower, and I get chunked to 1 HP. So now I have to base in TP, because he can just taunt flash me whenever and kill me. Where this is not how I want to be playing this lane, of course. If I was playing better, if I respected that taunt timer and just looked to poke him and not hit the tower for no reason, then I would be able to stay in lane until I get my Sork boots, and then it's going to be very, very easy to space them. And maybe even this game I would have gone Merc Treads. Actually, they've Callista mid, never mind. I would have gone Sorks. For the most part, I wanted to stay in lane and get Sorks, but I made a big mistake. I got taunt under tower, I have to base in TP, so now I just have to adapt. But however, because I did the right steps beforehand, now my wave's in a good state. It's coming back towards me, my wave control is good, and Shen was already pre-chunked, because I've been poking him every time he's getting went for last hits. He's low enough that I can look to pressure him. And it's important to know here, from this point, I'm trying to thin the wave as much as I can, so that when I fight him later on and look for an all-in, I don't have to fight 30 minions as well. I'm thinning it enough that it doesn't push towards him, it's still coming towards me, but it's not too many minions for me to deal with. So now, from this point in the lane, he would have had to call his jungler to help him, which would be drawing pressure, like we talked about earlier, it'd still be good. Or if he bases and TPs, which he probably should have done in this scenario, to avoid dying, then he would have lost a lot of CS and XP anyway from all of his minions killing mine. So I would have gained an advantage regardless, even though I'm the one that made the biggest mistake in this lane by getting taunted under tower. I was still able to recover well because everything else I did was quite good. I had a good ward, I had good wave control, good trades early, so that even if I make a huge mistake later on in the lane, I've already set up my foundation for success. Up next, we're going to be covering abilities, combos, and just some general tips and tricks you need to know about Kennen's spells to get the most use out of them. And the first one being, is you should be looking to prime your all-in and lane ahead of time by getting a stack of passive on them already. So W works, but it's better with Q, because Q is the spell you're going to be maxing. It's your highest damage spell early game, and if you can hit one ahead of time, the cooldown of Q is actually shorter or relatively similar to the stack of passive that you're able to get an extra Q down. So to show an example, where I hit a Q and I wait for my Q cooldown in lane. Now once it's almost back up, I can look to ER flash and he's instantly stunned. I can get a guaranteed Q, which is my highest damage spell. And the all-in is going to be a lot stronger overall than if I were to have just flashed on him mindlessly with no priming. There's a chance he flashes my Q, dashes it, and has more time to counterplay. You know, he could even Jace E me away. there's a lot of scenarios, a lot of champions with counterplay like that, where if you're to hit a stack of passive ahead of time, it's going to be a lot stronger overall, and Q is better because it's your highest damage spell, and the cooldown is shorter than all your other abilities. Another thing about Kennen's Q is you can actually use it to cancel auto attack animations, which is very important on Kennen, because his auto attack actually has quite a long wind up. So if you're able to cancel it with a Q, like this, then you don't have to wait for the full wind up, the full throw, and you can get your Q down faster by cancelling the auto attack animation and still getting your full damage down. The next tip is there's going to be a lot of scenarios where you can actually stun your opponent before you throw out your Q. So to show an example, where I'll chuck my W passive, then WE, now he's stunned, my Q is a guaranteed hit. He can't dash it, he can't flash it, he can't dodge it, or I can't even miss it because he's stunned. For the most part, this is going to guarantee your maximum amount of damage, where if you're to have started your combo with your Q, there's a chance where you just miss it while you're running towards him, or he dodges it, and it's a lot less chance of a guaranteed hit. However, don't tunnel on this. There are still some scenarios where, of course, you want to be chucking Qs at them and hoping they hit or trying to get the highest percentile of hitting them because it's just good poke in lane. But especially if you're looking to all-in your lane opponent, I'd strongly recommend trying to stun them before you chuck your Q, so there's no way they can dodge it or flash it. And my final tip for Q is hold on to it in matchups where they're going to be looking to all-in you. And the best example is versus Jax, where if you chuck your Q at him and you miss, he can now jump onto you, block your passive auto with his E, and you can't stun him without ulting. So early game, you could be looking to take a lot of damage from this Jax jumping onto you, because you have no way to stun and kite him out. And it's not just Jax, there's a lot of champions where if your W passive's on cooldown and you chuck out your Q and miss, now all of a sudden they can all in you and they can't get stunned, and it's going to be a very, very bad trade for you. So if you're to chuck your Q at your lane opponent and it misses, then you have to space him out and wait for your next Q cooldown. You can't be giving him this angle to jump onto your head when your Q's on cooldown if you're unable to stun him in return. And versus Jax, it can be the most punishing as he can block your W passive. In some matchups you can chuck a Q and hold onto your W passive and still stun them, and it's okay, but for the most part you want to be playing around your Q cooldown. If you're chucking at your lane opponent to try poke them, then you should be playing around the cooldown if it misses, because you can't stun them to disengage if they jump on your head. Moving on to the W. Now there's a common mistake I see a lot of beginner Kennens make, and that is they pop all of their passive stacks before they've actually used their W. So to show you what I mean by that, let's say I chuck a passive W, EQ, now he's got no orbs on him, I can't actually use my W active and get that extra damage down. But if I were to have used my W beforehand and then chuck a passive W at the end, he's going to have an extra orb on him, but that doesn't really matter. The main point is you've gotten all of your damage down. You've gotten all 4 of your damage abilities down, including the passive W. Where if you're to have stunned him before you actually press the W active, then you're going to have a lot less damage overall in that trade. And another mistake I see people make with the passive W is actually last hitting with it at bad times. If your lane opponent is playing in a way we can never hit a Q on him, he's using creeps to block it, he's standing far away, most of the time your trading will be from your passive W and the active W, which is a guaranteed hit because it's an auto attack, it's undodgeable, where if you're to last hit with it, now he can walk up to farm, and if you do an auto attack onto him, it's just a normal basic attack. It's not that threatening, but if you're to have farmed with your Q, just every last hit you take with your Q, because the cooldown is quite short, and even though he's playing in a way that blocks Q damage from standing behind creeps, you can still get a lot of damage down onto him by just proccing W off cooldown. And the final tip is you should be weaving in an auto attack between your W active, because it actually cancels the animation. So to show an example, where I'll chuck my auto attack, now I don't want a W straight away, because I don't have an animation to cancel. Where if I auto again and then W, it makes it a lot more smoother overall than if I had to have just W'd instantly and then try to get a clunky auto afterwards. It's going to be a lot less smooth and a lot less DPS overall. Now as for Kennen's E, it's pretty straightforward. It's a movement speed and attack speed steroid, so you want to be using it to get around the map, to get back to lane, and you want to be using the attack speed to break towers, to get good trades against your lane opponent, extra attack speed, and ideally just abuse that effect overall. Now something else about his E is that if you hit to E all the casters, you can now get the last hit with just 1 auto attack instead of 2, which can be a nice CSing tool early game, but as you start to get more and more AP, of course that won't be the case, but especially for laning, this is a good tip to know. Now as for Kennen's R, it's pretty straightforward, however there are a couple pointers I can give you. The first one being, instead of flashing and then ulting, you should be R flashing, because it's slightly quicker and harder to react for the opponent, and it would just get you a better teamfight result overall. And for the final piece of ulti advice, if you're about to be all in, try to get your ulti down ahead of time. So I'll show an example on the screen, but if champs are going to dive onto you, you want to be getting your ulti down before they actually land on you. So for example, if you're to verse a Jax in lane, and he jump stuns you, he's going to be beating you down for free. But if you get your ulti down while he's in the air, he's going to be taking damage from your ult, he's going to be getting stunned eventually, and the result is going to be a lot better than if you were to have ultied after he's already jumped onto you and stunned you and done a lot of damage. And as for the item tips, Prologue is actually an auto attack reset, which is very strong on Kennen because you can use it to get your W passive down faster. So let's say in this situation where I have 3 stacks on my passive, I can actually look to auto Prologue auto, QW, and it's a really good trade where it would take me a lot longer to get the stun and the auto down if I didn't use the protobelt properly as an auto attack reset. And for the final item tip, everyone that's playing Kennen should know this, and it's the fact that you can ulti and then Zhonya's. So to show an example here, where I'll R-flash Zhonya's, and this whole time I'm untargetable, invincible, and they're all getting destroyed by my ulti. If you're able to pull this off in a team fight, you're going to have a lot of success. Moving on to combos, there's not really many combos on Kennen that you need to know, but I will show you the best way to get a hard engaged combo down. And the best way is to start with E, then look to R-flash protobelt W Zhonya's. And then if you have time, you can chuck a Q out before your Zhonya's, but a lot of the time that you're R-flashing into a whole team, they're going to be using crowd control onto you, so a lot of the time it's better just to get your Zhonya's down. And sometimes you won't even have time to W, it'll depend on the game, but for the most part it's going to look something like this, where you start with E, and then you look to R-flash protobelt W Zhonya's, and then you'll get as much damage and CC down as you can. And the W is much more important than the Q, even though the Q damage is higher, because of course it's AoE, it'll proc to everyone that you've hit with your ulti, and they're going to get stunned a tick faster by getting hit by your W, and you don't have to wait for 3 stacks of ulti. However, there will be a lot of games where they have, let's say, a Malzahar, a Nautilus, Leona champs that are going to instantly CC you when you jump in, and in that situation you will just have to R-Zhonya's. But just play it by ear, it really depends on what you're versing. Maybe you are versing Malzahar, but he's used his ulti already. In that case, you can greed and get the extra damage and stun stack from your W down. It really just depends on what you see in the game. Now, as for Kennen's main way to disengage in the lane, you ideally want to be starting with your Q, looking to E through them as they jump onto you, and then W to pop the stun, kiting at them out, and then as they're walking away, you look to chase them down and get auto attacks. So I'll showcase an example here versus Jax, where he looks to stun, I kite him out, I go through him with my E to proc the stun, and then look to chase him down the lane. Now, Kennen's main trading tool is pretty simple. If they're using the creeps to block your Q, you just want to be looking to chuck an auto attack with the W, and then proccing the electrocute extra damage. It's pretty straightforward, but a lot of players will play to block your Q, so that's the best way you can get damage down onto them. And if you're looking to get a super aggressive trade down, you're of course E towards them, Q when you're inside them, and then look to basically punish them like this. However, this is very rare, it's only going to work for bad players that you literally run towards them, but it is the more aggressive way of trading, and you only do it in situations where they can't trade on you back. Like in this case where the Jax is too low to fight me back, it's of course very easy for me to take a trade like that. But if he was full HP, I'd be a lot more careful about using my E aggressively like that. Up next, we're going to be covering matchups, and on Kennen, you should be winning lane most of the time. This champion's lane phase is so strong, and of course your range versus mainly melee champions, but if you're just starting the champion or you haven't built your mastery yet, you're going to really struggle in a lot of these matchups, primarily in the skill matchup tier and above, that once you start to build your mastery and understand how to play each one, then you're going to start winning these anyway. As for the matchup, starting off in hard tier is of course just Irelia, and this is my ban when I play Kennen. This matchup is the hardest by far out of all of them for him, and that's just because once she has Vamp Scepter, she's going to nullify all your poke, and then once she's level 6, she can Q to a minion, ulti you, drop her E down, and it's pretty hard to dodge her E when you're slowed by her ulti, because of course you don't have a gap closer to dodge it. And then even if you get ganked early on in the game and you lose your flash, she can just R-flash you whenever she wants and kill you. It's basically very hard to play the Kennen side, but very easy to play the Irelia side, so that is my ban. Moving down the list to Malphite, I was close to putting him on the hard tier, but there's a bit more counterplay versus Malphite than there is to Irelia. And the way you counterplay it is basically, even though he can Q you down and poke you, especially around level 5 and 7, the Qs are going to start to do a lot of damage and then ult you when you're low. If you actually stay in lane until a Verdant Barrier, which is very easy versus Malphite because he's quite a weak early game, even if he's Qing you, as long as you're not taking these Qs off cooldown, as long as you're spacing him, and if he takes Comet, like 99% of Malphites will, you can actually dodge the Comet damage with your E, which takes a bit of skill getting used to, but you will get the hang of it, and then you're able to survive in lane until you get Verdant Barrier, which is a good chunk of magic resist, and it can help you survive this lane. Now, as for Akshan and Cassio, it's actually up to them to lose this lane, where if they walk towards you too aggressively, you look to space out their abilities or their autos, hit a Q onto them, and if that happens enough time, now all of a sudden you can look to flash onto them with ulti, or even receive a gank, and they're going to really struggle. But for the most part, if they're playing very well, this matchup is in their favor, because they have so much more damage than you in an all-in if you go near them, and they, for the most part, outrange you with their spells. The only way they're going to lose is if they disrespect and tank Qs to the hit. Now, as for the Rengar lane, he's of course going to look to take over the bushes and jump onto you and then W your stun, which can make the matchup quite difficult. And the way I recommend playing out this one is to of course ward the bushes, look to Q poke him if he's sitting in there, look to get a W off when he jumps for a minion, basically just look to punish him when he goes for farm out of the bush, and then take over the bush with vision if you can. Now, as for Vladimir, this won't be much of a problem for you in lower elo brackets. It'll take a very, very good Vladimir to hard punish you in this lane, or a good jungler that's utilizing their Vladimir. The fact that Vlad can, tank tower, pull to reset the aggro and dive you can be quite challenging, and also the fact that even though you're going to be taking small trades, he does as well. And any small trade you do with him, even if it's even or in your favor, he's just going to heal it back off minions, so it's pretty hard to win this matchup if he's playing well. Now, even though Riven is not as hard as Irelia, she still has an insane all-in, and she has a lot of mobility, especially if she has Flash or Nimbus Cloak Ignite. It's quite easy for her to get onto you. The only way you can really win this matchup is by spacing her very, very well, knowing her engage range, keeping your distance, and looking to poke her down slowly, but of course that can be quite tough, because she's just going to E a lot of your poke, that it's hard to get enough meaningful poke down before she looks to all in you. However, you should win this matchup early game, especially 1-3, so if you can gain an advantage at that point in the lane, then you can start to win it. And as for Tryndamere, this matchup is just annoying because he can run Doran Shield and Second Wind, and a lot of sustain from Q, of course, and eventually if he builds the Tiamat, he can look to proxy behind your tower, and it can be very, very difficult for you to do any meaningful damage to him at all. And the only way you can really win this matchup is to basically play for ganks, put him in a position where he can't survive a jungle gank, where crash him under a tower, poke him down, let the wave come back towards you, and hopefully your jungler uses that timer, because it's pretty hard to get enough meaningful damage to kill him if you aren't playing for the gank, if you're playing for the all-in by yourself, because he just has so much sustain. Or if you visit a Tryndamere that makes a mistake, right? If he builds a longsword, doesn't take second wind, doesn't have much sustain, then you can actually win this matchup. It's only the very, very good Tryndameres that know how to stay high HP versus Kennen and eventually get to the point where they can proxy. Moving down to skill matchups, all of these matchups are won or lost through spacing and playing around cooldowns, and the perfect example is versus Jace, where you need to do both. Now Jace is going to look to be poking you down with his range Q, of course the Shock Blast, and if you're able to dodge one or your minions block it, now you have a timer playing around his cooldown where you can eat towards him, look to hit a Q of your own and poke him. However, you do need to be spacing his hammer Q, because if you eat towards him looking to trade onto him, and he hits you with a hammer Q, starts bringing you down with autos, you're going to lose that trade. But if you space towards him, eat towards him, start spacing backwards when he walks towards you, trying to hit the hammer Q, and Q him while he's walking towards you, basically spacing him out while chucking out your Q, getting your W down, you're going to win that trade. And if you do that a couple times, now all of a sudden he's low. He's a no sustain champ, you can look for an angle to flash ulti him or even get a gank. You're going to find an opportunity to punish him if you're playing around his cooldowns, basically waiting for him to waste Shock Blast, miss it, either juke it, dodge it, use minions to block it, and then look to punish him on that timer while spacing out his other cooldowns. Moving down to the Kennen favored matchups, most of the time I see people lose these ones, it's just because they're playing too aggressively without thinking about the opponent champ's conditions. And versus Jax, of course, his condition is, once you've missed your Q, like we talked about earlier, he can jump onto you and you can't really get a stun off. Where if you hold your Q versus Jax, poke him down with autos and the W empowered auto, then once he jumps onto you, QEW, space out his E, and then chase him down the lane, you're going to win that lane, you're going to win that trade, and you're going to be in a very good position. And the same as versus Fiora, where if you just E towards her while she still has parry, she parries your stun, or even if she just hits the attack speed reducing parry, she's going to destroy you. Where if you're to have auto attacked her down, Q'd her, and she parry slides onto you, you dodge her parry with your E, now all of a sudden you're going to win that trade, you're probably going to win the lane. And all of these champions have scenarios like that, even Mordekaiser, you E towards him, you get EQ auto attack, you're going to lose that trade, and so on and so forth. All of them have scenarios like that, and you just need to think about how are they going to win the lane against me. And if you play around that specific thing, where, Cho'Gath Q, if you dodge that with E, you'll win. Dr. Mundo Q, you look to walk towards him, space it out, then you can chase him down. Every champion has a scenario where they can beat you if you're not thinking about it. But if you plan it ahead of time, then this matchup is definitely in your favor. And as for the free matchups, these ones are really all about spacing, where you'll probably take First Strike. If you're not a big fan of First Strike, it's fine, you don't have to take it, but I do recommend it in the very easy matchups, and then you just look to make sure they never get a chance to auto-attack you, by basically holding onto your E, unless they run towards you, and then just auto-attacking them down, looking to QW them, and farming First Strike off them, farming their HP bar. Eventually they'll get to the point where you might be able to punish them or break plates in front of them. Up next, we'll be covering Kennen's identity and the mindset I want you to adapt when you're playing this champion. And the first point is that your champion is of course one of the strongest flankers in the game, so you should be playing team fights with that in mind and trying to get access to the backline in a fight, whether that be through buying Sweeper and trying to get into their jungle, or even setting up camp in their jungle ahead of time before the fight's even started, maybe 30-40 seconds before, you can creep into their jungle, sweep, make sure you're unseen, and then just hide and wait, because alright, they're probably going to come into this dragon to fight it, and then I'm going to be waiting ready. You don't have to necessarily rock up to the dragon on spawn and try to get your flank where they're already prepared. If you find your position ahead of time, there's a higher chance that you're able to get off a flank. Now, even though Kennen is very good at teamfighting and primarily flanking, that doesn't mean you can just fight anywhere. It is a lot easier for Kennen to fight around neutrals, mainly Dragon, Herald, and Baron, than it is around towers. So even if your team is looking to siege a tower, and their team is holding it, you're probably not going to be able to flank the mid. If they are playing properly, they're going to have a ward that's going to see you coming, because trying to flank them in a lane is much more difficult because there's only one or two avenues that you can be coming from, so it's a lot easier for them to cover their entrances. Where if you're fighting from the jungle and trying to flank through their jungle, there's so many different avenues that they have to be covering each one or warding each one for them to be able to spot you. That if you're creative and you're thinking ahead of time, especially if you go in there beforehand, set up where you want to be hiding, it's going to be almost impossible for them to spot you. And then even if they do spot you, they've left their tower, right? They don't have a tower to fall back on there in the jungle, so it's a lot harder for them to retreat and get away from you. Another thing about Kennen, and I see many players make this mistake, is he's very reliant on his ultimate. Now everyone knows what that means, but that doesn't mean players know how to execute on that. So the fact that he is so reliant on his ultimate means if your ulti is on cooldown, you want to be basing as fast as possible, because most of the time that you use your ultimate, out of lane of course, you probably have to base after. You've entered a fight, you've jumped into the middle of their team, dropped your ulti, and they're going to hit you back. It's very, very rare that you're going to get an ulti off and be full HP afterwards. They're probably going to damage you, or at the very least you're going to be in a position where you have to base. Let's say you won the fight, you've got a lot of gold. You want to be basing as fast as possible. You don't want to be sticking around trying to pressure with just your QWE, where that's not Kennen's strength. You want to be basing, getting your items, getting your HP back, getting, pink wards, setting up for the next fight ahead of time, getting ready to use your next ultimate instead of just trying to waste time with your QWE. So the main point about what I'm trying to say is that when your ulti is on cooldown after a fight, you want to be resetting as fast as possible and being ready for the next play. And to finish off, in my opinion, one of the hardest parts about playing Kennen is the fact that you are so weak in the side lane unless you're already ahead. A lot of these champions, Riven, Fiora, Jax, Camille, they just straight up beat you in the side lane, or at the very least they make it so it's hard for you to push without them being able to engage onto you. And especially later on in the game when they build Hullbreaker, it's just very hard for you to get any meaningful work done in the side lane. So what you want to be doing as Kennen to avoid that is you just want to be resetting the lane to even before you look to make a play. Even or push, if you can get push, of course take it, but for the very least you want to be neutralizing the side lane before you make a play. You don't want to come out of map having to go straight to Dragon, straight to Baron and fight straight away. Even though some situations you should be doing that, that's not ideal. Most cases, you want to be heading straight back to your side lane, resetting it, making it either even or one wave past, where your lane opponent's going to have to clear 1, 2, or 3 waves before he's actually hitting your tower, and then you're going to have a lot of time to pressure the map and look to impact these team fights. Where the problem with just heading straight to the fight is that if they're already bashing your tier 2, now your team has a choice where people have to base and answer him, or they have to choose to do the fight, and all your opponent team has to do is just look at you and make sure you're not leaving, and it's going to be a very tough situation for you to be in. But if you were to have done the work beforehand, reset the wave to even, made it so it's going to take them time to get a significant objective, then you actually can use that time to gain an objective, start a fight, and impact the game in some way. So in conclusion, the mentality I want you to have on this champion is that you're so strong in lane, if you're not winning your matchup, you should be reviewing it and seeing what you did wrong, and you're so strong in team fights, especially flanks, that if you play a whole game without impacting a team fight significantly or getting a flank off at all, I want you to review and see what you're doing beforehand and even during to see what you can be doing better, because most of the time, people are messing up the execution of Kennen during the moment, because ideally you just want to be E-flash ulting, right? There's not much to it. Mechanically, the problem they are making is there beforehand, where they're not setting up their side lane ahead of time, they're not getting into correct position ahead of time, they're just not taking the correct steps, basically preemptively. They are just rocking up to the fight trying to get that crazy flash Kennen ulti that they've seen in montages, but they're not doing the steps beforehand that they need to do. Up next, I'm going to be covering the mid game. Now, to break it down and essentially make it easier for you to understand, the main way you're going to be playing Kennen in the mid game is to neutralize the side lane and then look to set up at a neutral. However, if there is no neutral objective spawning, you want to neutralize side and then look to predict where they're going to go in a bush and essentially cheese them. So look to make a pick. And here I neutralize side, and instead of running mid and trying to ARAM, or running back top and clearing the wave, I look to hide in a bush by the Krugs and predict that Ziggs is going to try to rotate to his team and join the fight. Because of course he's playing Ziggs, he doesn't want to be stuck in side lane the whole game. Most likely he wants to be rotating. And it works especially on junglers if you can predict what camps they're going for, or supports where they want to be getting vision. You essentially go there ahead of time with your sweeper, with your pink, and just camp there after neutralizing your wave, because that means the time you're sitting in the bush waiting for someone to come, you're not losing anything, and if they do choose to go in, then you're going to get something for essentially free. And I'll show another example of it, where even though top lane I'm not keeping him trapped under the tower, that's not really what Kennen wants to do. Top is neutralized in the sense where he is not gaining anything, and it's going to take him a long time before he can hit this tower, which means I have a lot of free time to essentially camp in a bush and try to predict someone's movement. And here my team is pressuring mid lane very, very hard, so I'm looking to either look to flank them or just camp in the bush and wait for their jungler to come. Where essentially their jungler comes and I'm able to cheese him and get the kill off, where even if he didn't come, if he was somewhere else, say he showed bot, then I'd look to flank mid. My options were open because I went somewhere ahead of time, and I was essentially camping it out, seeing what was happening, and I wasn't really rushing into anything. I didn't try to flank them straight away, because if Elise was nearby and marked me, had a cocoon on me, it wouldn't go too well, and I didn't tunnel on keeping Shen trapped under tower, because that's not really my champ's identity. I want to really neutralize the side lane, where in the sense where he's not using it to pressure anything, and then look to make a play of my own. And to showcase one more example where it's more of a teamfight outcome than a pick, here I am neutralizing the side lane yet again. I don't want to have to be answering this. I want to have plenty of time to set up where I want to be, and I don't want to be stuck under tower as Kennen. So I'm neutralizing the side, making it so no one can use it to pressure me, and then looking to make a play of my own. So I'll speed up a little bit, and here I've neutralized the side, and I notice everyone is trying to set up for this herald. So I'm here to either flank it or join the fight, but in this case I can't flank directly from the back because I don't know where Elise is, I don't want to walk into a cocoon, and I'm able to essentially enter the fight from the side and get a nice little engage down on their AD. Actually I think Killista was mid, but the point still stands where neutralize the side, make it so you don't have to answer it, and then look to make a play of your own, either by setting up in for a team fight or looking to make a pick by camping a bush. Up next, we're going to be covering team fighting. Now, you've probably heard me say throughout this guide that on Kennen you're going to be looking to flank from the side or the back, which is extremely true. However, there's still a lot of advice I can give you about when to flank and how to flank that'll really help you get the most out of it. Because I see a lot of Kennens, they feel that as soon as you're in the flank position, you just need to flash ulti and blow your combo straight away. Which of course, in some cases that may be true, but there's a lot of situations where holding your spells is more valuable. So I have an example here where I'm versus a pretty good team. Their AD carry is very, very strong, very fed, and he's holding all his abilities. So if I were to have flash ult proto-belted him right now, we'd lose the fight. I'd probably get exhausted by Soraka, Zeri would dash away, and they'd just really gun me down and Zeri would carry this game. However, I know that holding my spells is more valuable, and if I were to upload it on the Ziggs or blow it on the rest of them by trying to flash after them, we're going to lose the game. So I instead blow my basic spells on the Ziggs, look to stun him, look to chunk him, and now the rest of my team have time to follow me up, they burn the rest of their spells, and now this is my chance to strike. I flash Protobout over the wall and look to kill the Zeri after he's already blown his escape. Now I know that once he's used his key escape ability, used his dash, it's a free opportunity for me to punish. If I were to have gone earlier before I used that, he's going to be the one punishing me, right? It's basically a standoff of who wastes their key spells first. Now, that's not always going to be the case. There will be some situations where you're flanking unseen, and you can just look to get a good flash ulti off instantly, or you're strong enough to do so regardless of their spell. But a lot of cases, especially in this game where their AD carry was a lot stronger than everyone else in the game, it's very, very important for me to be able to use my key spell on him after he's wasted his one, so he's unable to escape me. Now for another example where I've set up ahead of time, top lane is neutralized, I'm trying to hide in their jungle, looking to make a pick, looking to get a flank, and they actually try to start Baron because they have Cassiopeia. So now they're pinned, they're between me top and the rest of my team bot, so even though they see me flanking, they really have to make a choice. They have to engage on me or engage on my team, and in this case they choose to engage on my team. And now they're still cut off, they're still stuck between me and this rumble, and I'm able to get a nice flash ulti onto them. Where if I had to have flash ulti straight away, earlier on in their fight, of course it would have gone very poorly. I waited for them to make a mistake, because they were feeling very pressured being stuck between me and the rest of my team, and I was spacing them well enough that they couldn't engage onto me, so they of course have to engage on my team, and when they do so, I was ready to flash ulti and follow up and basically carry the fight. And for my final example, I wanted to showcase a TP flank, where even though I've died in this game, I noticed that there's a lot of wards on the map. I have an option mid, I have an option in the bot jungle. I have so many choices to TP if they look to play more aggressively or look to play for mid tower. So in this case, I was able to TP to the bot river bush, and get a flank off. And here I prioritize Evelynn because she's the 1k shutdown, but of course you go on the AD, it doesn't really matter. But the main thing I want you to keep in mind when TP flanking is it shouldn't just be reactionary like, oh TP flank, let's go. You should be planning it out ahead of time. And the way you do that is by being aware of the maps, the wards on the map, and then what the enemy team is doing. So if you see them mid, you could be thinking, okay, if they walk up and hit this tower, I'll TP to this ward and kill them. If they don't, I won't. But if you were to just TP on the fly when you see an opportunity, it will work sometimes, but most of the time it's not going to work out very well. Where if you're to have planned it ahead of time, if they do this objective, I'll TP here. If they start trying to hit this tower, I'll TP here. It's going to work a lot better. Planning your TPs ahead of time are going to lead to a lot more successful flanks overall. Up next, we'll be covering drafting, so you can learn everything you need to know about when it's good to play Kennen and when it's bad to play him, relative to what champs you're seeing on your team and the enemy team. So we'll start off by going through champs that you want to be seeing on your team comp with Kennen. So we'll give yourself Kennen here, and ideally if you play Kennen you will be banning Irelia or Malphite, whichever matchup you hate more. Irelia is the hardest, but you might find the Irelias in your bracket are quite bad, so in that case Malphite is a good ban. And with Kennen you want to be playing with AD bruiser junglers, so champs like Belveth, Kha'Zix, Hecarim, it doesn't matter as long as they're AD and they want to be diving in with you. Champs that are very passive sitting back or AP champions feel horrible, especially AP champs because they're going to stack Merc Treads and Magic Resist, and it's going to be very hard for you to play your champ the way you want to be playing it. So ideally with Kennen you want to have AD bruiser and not have an AP champion, and also I don't really like playing Kennen with Jarvan as there's a bit of an anti-synergy there where you'll find yourself getting stuck outside of his ulti and unable to access the backline. But I'd still much prefer Jarvan, of course, than an AP champion. And then for mid, you want to be playing a dive champion. So champs like Talon, champs like Yone, very, very good. Even Neferi is fine. But AP champs are okay too, as long as they can follow up the dive with you. It doesn't really matter. Just champs that want to be accessing the backline with you and helping you do what you want to be doing are very, very good. And the champs you want to avoid having on your team as Kennen is champs that Merc Treads are very, very good versus. So champs like Lissandra with Kennen feels horrible. Twisted Fate, of course, feels really bad. Ideally, if you look at your comp and you think they're going to be stacking Merc Treads anyway, if I pick Kennen, it's going to be a very, very tough time for me, then you probably want to be picking a different champion. Or if you're playing Clash with the boys, tell them to pick a different champ instead. So I'll give our mid back to Yone because that's what you want to see. And then for AD carry, you want to be playing a dive champion as well. So champs like Kai'Sa, champs like Tristana, very, very good with Kennen, help you follow up, and support, of course, and engage support. They can get stuck in with you. Rel, Alistair, very good. Ideally, you just want to be playing a dive comp, where all of you are running forward together with the same purpose of diving the backline and blowing open the game. Moving on to the enemy team, the champs you don't want to be seeing top lane are champs with insane amounts of gank setup and also trading tools in their kit. So a champion like Ornn, where he could go 3 points Q and even take Comet as his runes, look to poke you down and look to all in you with his ulti with a jungler, it's going to be hard for you to survive that sort of thing. Whereas especially with Camille as well, once she has ulti, very, very good gank setup, she could trade with you with W for a bit, get you low enough for a gank, and especially the raid boss of all top laners, Malphite, where he's just going to chuck a couple Qs at you and then press R on you when his jungler's there, and if you don't have flash, it's going to be very, very hard to survive. Now, as for junglers, of course you don't want to be versing early push junglers. Champs like Rek'Sai, champs like Elise can be quite tough. I don't mind Elise too much actually because it's a skill shot. You can look to dodge with your E, but champs that are just point click are very, very hard for you to play against as Kennen. Now, for mid lane, champs you do want to be versing are immobile champs that is very, very easy for you to flank in the mid game. So, of course, champs like Ori, champs like Twisted Fate, stuff like that, is not too bad. And what you don't want to be versing are champs that can actually mark you. So, champs like Silas, champs like Yone, where they can actually mark you in team fights. And what I mean by that is if you're trying to get a flank off, let's say around Baron Pit, around Dragon Pit, they can actually run at you, find you, and just chase you away from your position and fight you down. Where certain mid laners can't be doing that because you'll just flash on them and kill them. Or if you flash on a Silas, he of course is just going to beat you, so that's not what you want to be doing. And as for AD carries, you really want to be versing immobile champions. So champs like Jhin of stuff, very, very easy for you to verse. And champs like Ashe, champs like Varus, not too bad. But champs you don't want to be versing are champs that can get away from you easily. So Kai'Sa, even Xayah, and Tristana is the hardest because not only does he have a jump to just completely leave your ulti, he can also ult your way. So if you're trying to flank his team, all he needs to do is press R, and he's really just cancel you out of that fight. And as for supports, it's similar to mid. You don't want to be versing champs that can mark you. So a champ like Nautilus, he can just run at you, press a point-click ulti on you, and it's really hard for you to get a flash ulti on his team. He can hook you, or a champ like Alistair especially can look to just headbutt you away as you're Eing in, and it can make your job very, very hard. You ideally want to be versing immobile enchanters, and preferably ones that don't have peel tools like Milio or Janna. You want to be versing champs like Soraka or Lulu. Up next, I'm going to be covering how to counter Kennen. Now, as for lane, it can be quite challenging, but if you run Darn Shield second wind and you play to maintain high HP, you're probably going to be fine, because not a lot of Kennens are pushing their champion to the limit and punishing you as hard as they should be. And what I mean by playing accordingly is if you run Darn Shield second wind versus Kennen, and you just played for sustain, so if you let him auto attack you once and then you space him out so he can't hit you again, let that auto regen back from the Darn Shield second wind, you're probably going to be fine. And you just time it, so when you go for a last hit, you take an auto, you space back, let the regen kick in, and you just try to maintain high HP. And the reason you want to be doing that is because if you receive a gank, you don't want to be so low that if you jump on the Kennen, he'll just kill you. And also, you want to be staying high HP for as long as possible, because ideally versus Kennen, you want to be farming your Merc Treads on your first base, where Kennen's objective in the lane versus you should be to force you to base before him so you can't get your tier 2s. If you can play accordingly, stay high HP with the double regen tech, and then get Merc Treads on your first base, regardless of what champ you're on, you're probably going to have a lot higher success rate versus champion. Now, as for how to counter Kennen in the mid game, your game plan should be to try keep him stuck in the side. Unless, of course, you're a strong team fighting champion as well. If you're playing all or Malphite, then it's fine to match the team fight. But if you're playing a bruiser or a side lane champion, you should be looking to keep him stuck there and make him react to you as much as possible. And the easy way to do that is to build Hullbreaker early. Even if you build it as a second item, it's going to be very hard for Kennen to deal with the super creep because he's an AP champion with not much damage to the enhanced Kennen creep. Where even if you don't have the Hullbreaker, a lot of these Kennens you're visiting are going to make the mistake of rotating too early to an objective or staying there too long when it's already done, and you can force them to respond to you and then look to make a play of your own and really keep them stuck in the side lane, unable to play the champion the way they want to be playing it. Now, moving on to the point I have highlighted green, mark him in team fights. Now, this is extremely important versus Kennen, because even the bad Kennens, even the ones that don't know how to lane or how to mid game, they are still going to know in team fights you should be flanking on this champion instead of fighting from the front. Because if they've watched any pro games at all, or if they just understand, if they've played the champion at all, they're going to know that front to back on Kennen doesn't really work out well for them, and they're going to be trying to access your team from the back and trying to get a juicy flash ulti that they've probably seen in a game or a stream somewhere. So now, if you can mark him in team fights to prevent it from doing that, you're going to have a lot of success. So let's say you're playing any sort of bruiser, Renekton, Jax, Camille, doesn't matter, or even certain tanks, champs like Cassante, champs like Malphite, you can look to mark him in this team fight and stop him from exiting your backline by finding where he's flanking from, so Blue Trinket will help a lot with that, and then just basically having a standoff with him where if some champs you can just look to engage onto him and beat him 1v1, because especially mid-game, around the time you're team fighting, Kennen's 1v1 is quite weak, or you can just look to stop at him and use CC on him if he tries to walk past you and access your team, and he's either going to give up the flank and try to front to back, which of course is bad on Kennen, or he's going to try force it anyway and it's going to be very, very sloppy from him. So I recommend strongly, if you verse Kennen, before the team fight starts, try to find where he is, if he's trying to flank mark him, and if he's trying to front to back, then you've already won the fight. Now, we covered a lot, and I'm going to be ending it with the main takeaways, the most important pieces of information I want you to nail into your brain when learning this champion. First one being, play your lane relative to what both junglers are doing. So you should be seeing what way your jungler's pathing and trying to find out where their jungler's going ahead of time, and you have to be playing your lane accordingly. Like we showed in the laning examples, the jungler is probably going to have a target on your back. You are playing a range champ versus a melee champ, your lane opponent is asking for help, then you're probably going to have to play around the enemy jungler to some degree, so if you can plan that out ahead of time, you're going to have a lot more success from getting a lead in your lane without dying to a gank. And as for mid-game, neutralize side, so make sure your wave is in a state where your opponent can't be using it to pressure you before you look to make a play, and that play is going to be setting up before an objective or looking to cheese them in a bush. And as for the locations where you want to be fighting, primarily it is going to be in the jungle around neutral objectives. So around Dragon, Herald, Baron, stuff like that, it's very, very easy for you to look to get a flank in the jungle because there's so many options for you to go from. Where if you're trying to flank them through the lane, there's only really two positions you can come from, and most teams are going to have that covered, especially if you're trying to dive them behind their tower. It's very easy for them to see you coming. However, there is an exception where you can look to TP flank them if they're trying to break your team's tower. If they're trying to hit your team's tower and you have a ward behind them, then that is of course a very, very good time to TP flank. All I'm saying is that if you're trying to walk behind them in the lane and flank them, it's probably not going to work out most of the time, and you're going to have a lot more success in the jungle around objectives. And the final thing being, if spotted when flanking, wait for the perfect opportunity. You don't need to just E-flash Protobot ulti straight away when you see enemy champs on your screen. You don't need to be that bloodthirsty. You can just stare at them, use your basic spells, maybe auto take people down, chuck Qs like I did against that Ziggs in that example, and then eventually your time will come where you can flash ulti. However, I don't want you to go the other way where you're just never flash ulting, you're just holding too long. Of course, I'd rather you use your spells than not. All I'm saying is that if they see you coming, most of the time they're not going to be bad enough that you can just flash ult them unless they've already blown all their key spells, which you should be aware of. I'm saying hold your spells for the right time by seeing what they're doing, seeing what spells they're using, waiting for the perfect situation, so that you know that when you flash ulti into the middle of their team or protobot ulti in, it's probably going to have a higher success rate than if you were to have just blown it straight away without waiting for any spells to be used. Okay guys, I'm going to wrap it up there, and before I go, I just want to say, I hope nobody gets disheartened from having a couple bad Kennen games early on in their journey. This champion can be quite difficult to learn, but once you start to get more comfortable, once you start to get 10 to 20 games in, you're really going to start enjoying this champ, because he's so fun in lane, so fun in team fighting, and if you can get to the point where you're good at both of those, you're really going to fall in love with this champion. So I hope you guys look forward to that, and I'll see you guys next time.